Well, welcome, parents and anybody else who's out there watching. We are doing a live The Journey podcast, talking about election results, and not just looking at election results from the other day, but really diving into what can we learn, what do these results tell us, and really, where do we go from here? I think that's an important attribute. So I'm Dan Panetti. For those of you who haven't spent some time with us, we've got some great podcasts out there that are hopefully educating and equipping parents, Christian thinkers who are trying to make a difference in the world. And I started with this because I wanted you to know that, yes, I went and voted along with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people the other day who voted in elections all across the country. We're here in Texas, and there were 17 constitutional amendments that were on our ballot here in Texas, as well as other parts of the state that dealt with bond elections, all sorts of different things, tons of money. If you want to look at how much money was on the ballot the other day, it was amazing. But we're also going to look at some things that happened in other states. What happened in New Jersey, in Virginia, they had governor's races. New York City had a mayor's race. Obviously, people from all over the country were paying attention to that because it's very interesting. And then Prop 50, for those of you out in California, they had a particular election that dealt with something that was happening here in Texas. And so we talk about, there it is, there's the things that we want to look at. Prop 50, we talk about how we don't want to California my Texas. Well, California just did that. They California'd my Texas. They countered the political moves of Texas with their own political move, and we're going to talk about what that was and why that's important, and really what does it mean to us? What does it mean to us, as followers of Jesus Christ, who use this as our guide, right? The Word of God is our guide for navigating all of life, including politics. Because my biblical worldview is what informs me, not only on how I should vote, but how I should understand things that happen in the vote. And so I don't place all of my faith in the political process, but I do understand that politics and the principles and the parties and the people are actually all important. And so we want to just kind of dive into some of the things that we learned from the other day. And so let's start looking at, well, I guess let's examine real quick just the idea of why is it important to vote? I mean, let me just get that out and put that in there. One, I say it's an opportunity to express your views and values. I think it's often been said, right, that if you don't vote, then in our representative democracy, the people who did vote have an opportunity to navigate and orchestrate where this world goes, where our country goes. I think it's been said, what's the difference between a person who doesn't read and a person who can't read? And the thought behind that is if you're not reading, you're not using the gifts and abilities and the talents that you have. And so you're no different than a person who can't read. And so because you can read, you should read. Well, it's the same thing about voting. If you can vote, you should vote. If you have the right and the privilege and the responsibility to go vote, you need to go express that vote. And not doing that, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Why would people not go vote? I think there's a couple of reasons. One, I'll say this. I think people get a little bit worn out with a lot of politics all the time, politics 24/7. They feel like everything's political. And I'll say this: be careful of just watching political news things all the time. It doesn't mean that you need to digest, right? Your whole diet needs to be politics, but it does mean that you need to be an informed voter. And so I would say pay attention, right? If you have an opportunity, that means you also have a responsibility to go and cast an informed ballot. And so make sure that you're paying attention to good news sources and good influential biblical things that will help you understand how to cast an informed ballot. But I also think it's a responsibility as Christians. I kind of compare it in terms of working out to leg day. right? And for those of you who kind of get the joke, leg day is the day that I would say that most guys at the gym probably skip, right? So when it comes to chest, arms, back and shoulders, right? We're you got to do core. You might even do stretching. But when it comes to leg day is a day that is just kind of known that a lot of guys are going to skip leg day at the gym. And that's what happens with voting, right? It's just one of those things that we take for granted, the privilege and the opportunity that when many of us have been born into as Americans, and we just go along as if this experiment in self-government is just going to continue on forever, unabated, just be, like your economic portfolio, right? Up and to the right, everything's going to be great. And let me just tell you that's not only it's not the case, it's not a true scenario. The concept is if you're not using it, you're going to lose it. And so the same thing is true in terms of our freedoms, our rights, our privileges in this particular country. Religious freedom is obviously under attack as you go across. And that's one of the things we'll talk about when we look at these particular election results. Parental rights and religious freedom were something that were not gained, were lost in this election. And what does that mean for us? And so that's an important part. Government. I want to just make sure that you understand this. Government is important. It governs. It rules. There's a quote that's attributed to George Washington where he said this. He said, "Government is not reason. It is not eloquent. It is a force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. Never for a moment should it be left to irresponsible action." And so whether George Washington said that or not, you can tell from the way that he governed and the way that our framers established our particular government, that's one of the underlying principles that they had, that government's a force, right? It can force you to do things. And we're going to talk about some of the things that government is forcing people to do against, right, their own conscience, against the best judgment that they have. One of the things that you'll see, LGBTQ issues continue to rise in our particular culture, and government is taking stands on these particular things. I remember watching one of the articles that came out on the New Jersey governor, and they were asking candidates where they stood on different issues and whether a parent. So if you're at a public school and they're promoting an LGBTQ curriculum, an agenda in the school system, can you as a parent remove your child from that particular instruction? Right? It's your right as a parent to guide the instruction of your children. And so when you place them in a school, you're allowing that school to teach your son or daughter these particular issues. Well, what if there are issues that you don't agree with? What if there are issues that you don't feel like need to be examined with your 4, 5, 6-year-old son or daughter? Issues dealing with gender and sexuality, and issues from a non-biblical perspective. Do you have the right as a parent to say, no, my son or daughter is not going to be a part of that? There are a lot of people who would say, no, you don't have a right. In Texas, we just passed a law that said, no, parents have a right. Parents have a right to guide the education and instruction of their children. But in many other states, that's not true. And so that's one of the things we'll talk about, is just how important this is for understand the issues that were on the ballot before us. And I'll just say that's one of the reasons that I vote. It's not just because, like in Texas, we had 17 constitutional issues, and maybe you're thinking to yourself, well, there are other really, really important issues in other states, but I'm not a member of that state, right? I didn't get to go vote in the mayoral race in New York City. I didn't get to vote in the gubernatorial race in New Jersey or Virginia. Right, but you're a citizen of Texas. And so what did you have a right to vote on? And again, kind of like going to the gym, it's not going because you want to go. It's not going because it's convenient to go. It's going because it's the best thing for you to do. And I think we need to get into the habit of voting from that particular opportunity, right? We have an opportunity and a responsibility to go vote. And every time there's something on the ballot, we should take the responsibility and the opportunity to vote seriously, and we should dig into the issues. We should go cast the best informed ballot that we can, and we should express our views and our values on these particular things. And so it's a habit to get into. It's something that we should do. And I'm just going to tell you, if you don't vote, that means that somebody who went and cast their vote, somebody who went to the ballot box and took the time, right, their views and their values are now going to be the law of the land that we live in, and we are subject to those, because government, right, it's not reason, it's not the best ideas, it is the ideas that win at the ballot box. And if those ideas that win at the ballot box are contrary to God's law and rule, contrary to what's best for you and your family, you are still subject to those particular laws. And so that's a super, super important thing for us to understand as we go through here. Let's look at a couple of things that we can learn about as we examine these particular issues. Let's start with the New Jersey governor's race, right? Some people will say this idea, right? Politics, Democrats, Republicans. You got, here's the results that we're throwing up there for you to look at and say, what happened in this, particular governor's race. If you're not in New Jersey, you didn't get to vote in it. But what are the things that we can learn and we can take away from it? And you'll see that sometimes a race is not just about the two people that are running, but it's about a statement with something larger. And so some of these particular races are about the government shutdown, right? And people are frustrated with the government shutdown and whose responsibility is that? Or about the president and who's in office at the White House. And so we don't get to vote for the president right now, but we're going to vote for a governor that is going to either reflect those views that are coming out of Washington or are going to stand against those views that are coming out of Washington. And so you're going to see a lot of that as well. And I think that's a really important aspect for us to wrestle with in understanding that's why people vote is really a fascinating concept. Young people, a lot of the election returns, a lot of these polling things that are coming out after the election are going to, you're going to hear about how influential the younger vote was, especially younger women who are turning more liberal, younger men. I think in this particular election, you may have gotten a more liberal vote, but one of the things that's happening on college campuses, especially, you're seeing a lot of young men who are becoming more conservative, who are lining up their views and their values with a biblical ethic, and that's kind of an interesting thing to think about going forward. Is what are these young people? What are the next 50 years look like for the United States, and can we hold on to these particular freedoms? And so in New Jersey and as well as in Virginia and New York City, right, Democrats won. And one of the things that I want to ask about that, right, is the idea when people talk about, well, can you be a Christian and vote Republican, or can you be a Christian and vote Democrat? And I'm just going to tell you, I think that's the wrong question, right? The right question is, what are the particular principles of each of the parties? What are the particular principles of each of the candidates? And as a Christian, how do I evaluate those? And so one of the things that I thought was really interesting is whenever you get to a particular opportunity to look at the views and the values expressed from different candidates. And one of the things that I found that I thought was super helpful was in the Virginia governor's race. You had a Republican and a Democrat running for governor, and they will take these particular, candidate fact sheets, and they will lay out the particular issues for you. And the candidates will express their opinion. And a lot of the times that those opinions aren't just the personalities of the candidates, right, but they're the positions of the parties that they represent. And so where do Republicans stand on these particular issues? Where do Democrats stand on these particular issues? Not just where the two candidates stand, because the two candidates have to fit into those particular camps, right, the Republican and the Democrat camp. And I was really interested in the Virginia governor's one because not only were there, 15 different issues on this thing, and if you want to go find this online, you can probably look it up and find it, right? millionvoices.org. This is where this one came from. But we've got it up on the screen for you as well to take a look at. I was really interested in some of the issues that have been political issues in the past where, right, let's say the issue of abortion, right? I remember, 20 years ago, the issue of abortion really was about when, right, was a person legally allowed to have an abortion. And so we were debating over trimesters, and you were debating over late-term abortions and all the different things, that were happening. And I'm just going to tell you, as you look at this, the issue of abortion isn't about that anymore. On this particular questionnaire, the way that it's phrased is babies born alive. Okay, and I need to, right? I don't know what you're paying attention to. I don't know if you're driving in your car or you're on the treadmill, right? But I need you to pause for a second and listen to this, okay? There's going to be a number of questions from immigration to Doge cuts to parental rights to criminal justice reform, right? Keeping men out of women's spaces in sports, right? So we're just walking down this particular issue, but this is the one that really, really, really caught my attention. Babies born alive. It says, babies born alive. Do you as a candidate, here's the question given to them, do you as a candidate require medical care for babies who survive abortion? Okay, so just think about that for a second. Okay, we're not talking about the issue of abortion, right? And whether a mother can go have an abortion before that child is born. What it's saying is if that happens and yet that baby is born alive, so now you have a live child, okay? You have a baby who's born alive. Should you require that medical care and attention be given to that child who is alive? Okay, so here's the thing. What happens if you don't? Let's just wrestle with this, right? What happens if you don't? What happens if that child who's born alive is not given medical care and attention? That child's going to die, right? Allowing a live person to die. Now, I would say that abortion is killing, right, a live person anyway. Okay, but some people, are going to parse that and say, well, they're not born yet. Okay, well, here in this particular scenario, they're now born, right? They're alive. Right, they're out of the womb. They're going to, the two candidates are asked, right? The Republican and Democrat candidate are asked, right? Do you require medical care for babies who are born alive? Right? The Republican candidate in this one said yes. Right? I would say that government should say doctor, nurse, medical professional. Right? You are required to give professional care, medical care to that child who's born alive. Where the Democrat candidate in this one, right, Spanberger, who's the one who won. Okay, so that's why this is important, right? This particular person has won the office of governor, which means that now they're going to take these particular principles, right, and place them in. So now government has power to enforce these. So you might say, okay, what does that mean? It means, right, she said, no, I don't agree with that. I don't agree that a child who's born alive should be given medical care, that should be a requirement. Okay, think about that. Think about that. Abortion is no longer about the child in the womb and whether we're protecting that particular life. It's now even the child outside the womb. How far does that go then, right? There's the question, right? You may be thinking, right, slippery slope arguments. Okay, well, they're slippery slope arguments because if you start down a slippery slope, where do you stop? Okay, and that's one of the things that we've been talking about of abortion for years, right? If that child is not alive in the womb, is it alive, right, 6 inches later when it's born, when it's come out of the birth canal? And I would say that, most people that I know would be like, well, yes, once it's born, it's a real life. No. Not here, not in New Jersey, or not in Virginia, right? Because the Virginia governor is saying, no, I would not require. If I were governor, I would not require that. And the people went to the ballot box and voted for this person with these principles to be held in a public office to now create laws that have the force of government behind them. Right? Let me just run down this real quick, right? Immigration. Do you support sanctuary policies and mass amnesty? Right? What does that mean? It means anybody who's in the United States, right, basically making them citizens so that they can vote. Okay? How did they get here? Do they have the views and values that make America great, right? Or does it matter, right, how they got here, right? Can we just give mass amnesty and say, hey, listen, everybody's a citizen? And with citizenship comes rights and responsibilities, okay? So, right, Republican would say no, right? Not everybody who comes into the United States, right, in ways that are not legal and are not benefiting this country should have a right to vote. And yet the Democrats here in Virginia, right, Spanberger said yes, right? She would pass mass amnesty. Just give the right to vote to whomever. Okay. Doge cuts, right? Do we want government accountability? Do we want to see where our money is going from a governmental standpoint? The Republican in this one said yes. I think we need to have something like Doge, something like a department, right, of government efficiency, looking at where our money is being spent. Democrats said no, right? That shouldn't be an issue at all. Parental rights, we talked about this earlier, right? Defer to parents on gender and sexual ideology. So whose right is it to instruct your children in their gender and sexuality as God has designed? Is it your right as a parent, or is it the government's right to instruct? So if they want to teach your child something different, and understand, we're not talking about a high school. We're not talking about a middle school. We're talking about a gender and sexuality ideology that has gotten into kindergarten, first grade, second grade, right? And so the question was asked, whose right is it? Is the parents' right? Republicans said yes, parents' right. Democrats said no. So it's the right of the state. It's the right of the school to instruct children on these particular issues. Keeping men, as we're going in there, keeping men out of women's spaces in sports. Right? Should men be allowed to compete? Should biological men be allowed to compete against women? Should biological men be allowed to go into women's locker rooms, into women's bathrooms? Republicans said no. Democrats said yes. Right? We keep on going. Just an amazing thing as you go through here. School choice, right? Who's allowing, who's dictating where your children have a right to go to school and where that money is? It's your money. It's your children. Should you have an opportunity to allow your money to pay for the education of your child? Or should your money only go to the state, and the state is the one who then dictates where that money goes? Republicans said school choice, right? Parents should have a right to not only send their kids to whatever school they want, whatever, if they want to go to a public school, if they want to go to a private school, right? That should be the choice of the parents. And, right, they should have the resources that are theirs, right, should follow that particular child. And Democrats said no. Religious freedom, I thought this was a fascinating one, and just how they even termed it, right? On here it says religious freedom, mutual respect and tolerance for religious views, okay? Democrats said no, right? There should not be, so think about this. They said no, right? It's near the bottom. It's the second one to the bottom. It says no. We should not be respecting religious freedom and tolerance for other religious views, right? Here, think about this. From a government standpoint, we're not talking about a personal standpoint, right? We're not talking about Dan Panetti and somebody else, right? I'm Christian, you're something else. Should I respect you personally? That's not what it's asking. It's asking, should the government protect different views and values, right, equally across the board? And they're saying, no, the government should not. So which ones are they not going to respect? And here's the thing. Maybe it's yours, right? Maybe your religious views and values are the ones that the government, using its particular force, is going to say, no, you can't worship that way. You can't raise your children with those particular views and values. You can't. Right? We always think about maybe it's somebody else. Maybe it's somebody else's religious views and values that the government will be intolerant towards, right? But what if it's your views and values that they're intolerant towards? So that's a very, very interesting list of issues, right? And that's why it's so important when we think about these particular issues. And I want you to see the difference, right? The red, right, Republicans, the blue, Democrats. I want you to see the difference in understanding that the parties, not just the people, right, but the parties have different views on these different principles. And you need to understand, when you put that party into power, right? That party is going to take these particular policies and make them law. Okay, that's why we're voting on these things, right? We're saying these things are important. It's not just the personality. It's not just, hey, I like this person, right? Or this person is going to do a good job in office, right? It's this person is going to represent this particular party and these particular principles, right? From the top to the bottom, all the way down, which is another reason I think it's so important to go vote, right? When you look at your ballot, right, you're voting for, and in a normal election, sometimes, right, like this, you're just voting for a governor. There's a special election that you might have. Texas, we're just voting on constitutional amendments. Usually when I'm going to the ballot box, I'm voting on dozens of different offices, right? It may be a local, a state, or a federal issue, right? I've got all of those on there together. And so that's an important thing to think about, is when you go vote, right, you're placing those particular people in office, and they're instituting these particular policies at the state, at the local, right, and at the federal level. Okay. And so Virginia, right, you just elected a particular person, right, who has these particular views and values on these particular issues. Well, here's the deal. That particular person now, right, is going to put those policies into effect, not only in Virginia, right, but those policies are going to spill out into the rest of the country. And I'll tell you why they're going to spill out into the rest of the country. Okay. And here's the reason. Texas, right? When people don't like those particular views and values, and that becomes kind of the law of the land in Virginia, the only thing that people have an opportunity to vote with then is their feet, right? And they're moving to Texas. Okay. The thing that just happened in New York City, it's like, what happened in New York City, right? We just elected, or New York, individuals just elected a new mayor to this city. And what, as Mondami, right, has outspoken in terms of being a socialist, right? He's also Muslim. So you elected a Muslim socialist to the city of New York. And one of the things that he's going to do, right, when you look at all the different talking points, right, is a lot of socialism is government taking control of the means of production of a lot of different things that the private industry used to do. Now government's going to do. And how are businesses going to respond to that, right? When Dami is talking about, hey, I'm going to give free things to this. We're going to take care. We're going to build free housing for people. We're going to have free this. We're going to have free that, right? Government is going to basically provide all of these free things. Where do they get the resources and the money to do that? Okay, well, the businesses and the people who have the money and produce the money in the city of New York are already saying, listen, if Mondami gets elected, we're leaving the city of New York. And where are we going? We're going to Texas. Right? It's amazing, right? Pay attention to that. Right? We're going to Texas. Same thing happens in California. All the people in California, right? And we're going to talk about Prop 50 in a second, but all the people in California who are tired of California being unsuccessful as a state, right? Because you're taking people and you're taxing. By the way, New York City has the highest tax rates, right, of any city in America. Okay, so it's right when you're squeezing the people so much, right? Can you squeeze them anymore? And a lot of the businesses in New York have said, no, you can't squeeze this anymore. And so a new guy coming in saying, here's the thing I'm going to do. I'm going to squeeze a little bit more. I'm going to get more out of these people. They're going to end up taking their jobs. They're going to end up taking their businesses, and they're going to end up coming to Texas. Okay. And Texas, right, which is why it's so important of the elections that we have here, because more and more people want to come here because of the freedoms and the liberties that Texans and that the state of Texas offers. Why? Because Texans go to the ballot box and protect those, right? They protect those freedoms and those liberties where people in other cities are going to the ballot box and they're not protecting the freedoms and liberties. And they're giving, right, the responsibility of running the government to people who, one, don't have any experience in running the government, right? And two, have a view and a value of the government doing things that isn't in the best interest of everybody. And that's an amazing concept. So if you look at, right, these particular individuals that ran for the mayor of New York, right, you've got some people with some vast experience, and you've got a person who won that didn't have any experience, but had some ideas about socialism. I thought it was interesting. There were a number of reports that came out, even about Mondami's funding. And where does he get the money to run for mayor? It was interesting because Mondami pointed out that a lot of Andrew Cuomo's funding came from some President Trump supporters, right? And so he was saying, hey, listen, this is President Trump trying to come in here, right? Put his particular guy in office to run the city of New York, right? And he's like, we don't want that. Well, a number of reports that came out was Mondami's funding came from people who had ties to terrorism, right? This is the city, right, that experienced, right, 9/11 and a terrorist attack, right, on the World Trade Center, right? And yet some of the funding for their mayor came from some of those same individuals that are connected and tied with, right, that have terrorist ties. And that's one of the things that the news kept on, looking at is do people in New York pay attention to these things? Is there any hesitation in putting in power a particular person, right, who's got ties, right, who's got connections to people who have, right, flown planes into buildings in our city? Is anybody paying attention to this? And I think that's one of the things that you realize is when you have the right to vote, why do people go vote the way that they vote? And you're finding out that a lot of people are looking to vote for their own self-interest, right? What is it that I can get from government? Okay, and that's one of the things that we always have looked at is the particular experiment that we have in self-governance, right? Is that people shouldn't be looking at just what do they get out of government, right? But what's my role and my responsibility? Because I'll just say this, when government begins to do something, it's very difficult to stop government from doing that thing, okay? Which is why, let's talk about it, which is why we have a government shutdown for the longest time period that we've ever had. When Obama was in office, he created Obamacare, right? A healthcare system that was given out to people, right, that couldn't get adequate health care in other ways. So all of a sudden, government, in a sense, to boil it down, government became a healthcare provider, right, an insurance provider. Well, if government gets into that particular business, all government's going to do is continue to expand what it does. It will never shrink. And so it continues to ask for more and more money, and more people get that government insurance, and more people are reliant on the government providing, right? Which is one of the reasons that the government shutdown has such a huge impact, right? Is there's a lot of people who are reliant on government for their food and their sustenance for the day, right? We talk about, SNAP, right? And you've heard that before, but the idea that there are people out there that are getting money from the government to go provide food for their family. And if the government shut down, they don't get that food. Well, here's the deal. What happens when government gets that big and that important in a person's life, right? That they can't survive without government functioning, okay? And that's where this is the real principle that happens is if government gets so big, right? And if government takes over something, that means the free enterprise can't compete against it, right? Because it's, in a sense, it's competing against the people themselves, right? Because we're the ones who are paying for it. It's just tremendously inefficient when we do. Well, that's the thing that the government shut down for right now is because the Republicans in control of, the government in DC, there's a bill that they have to pass in October that basically funds the government. The Republicans were not going to refund Obamacare. And so the Democrats didn't vote for the continuing resolution to fund the government. And they shut down, right, the government. And they said, no, we're not going to allow government to continue until you promise, until you give the funding, right, for Obamacare. Because here's the thing, once government gets into something, you can never reduce it. And that's one of the things that if you look at what, right, President Trump has brought to DC, right, is greater accountability and a responsibility to say, hey, is government being efficient with the things that it's doing? If there's things that maybe government shouldn't be doing, can we rein that in? Can we bring that back? And one of the things that you're seeing is how impossible that is. One of the people that I'm super glad that's there in government is actually Mike Johnson. Mike's a good friend of mine personally, known him for about 30 years. And when he became Speaker of the House, so thrilled to have his leadership there. Because one of the things is Mike's very intentional about his understanding of what government is. And so he's got something called Mike Johnson's 7 Core Principles of Conservatism. And you can look it up. It's on his congressman website, super easy to find. But his number 1 is individual liberty, right? So if you look at government, government should not replace you as the individual in terms of your own liberty and freedom. Right? You don't want government to interfere with your ability to practice your religion, to have whatever job you want to have, right? Government shouldn't interfere with individual freedom and liberty. But the other thing is, right, we want limited government, okay? We want a smaller government. We don't want government doing all of these different things that other spheres should be doing. And so one of the things that you're seeing, right, when we talk about the government shutdown and people who can't get food anywhere else except for government money, right? Where is the church, right? Where are individual responsibilities to take care of our neighbor? And I'm just going to tell you, those things have diminished greatly because the government, right, is now supplying those things. You'll see one of my favorite books called The Law by Frederick Bastiat. He writes about how dangerous socialism is. And socialism in that sense is just the government coming in and taking, right, the means of responsibility of providing for the citizen, instead of you and I as individuals, instead of the church, right, instead of the family, instead of the church, right, government is the one who is supplying these things, and government is the one who's responsible, right? And Bastiat will say, can I tell you, here's the thing. One, it's tremendously inefficient, right? So if I wanted to give somebody $100 to help them with their food, right? A family's in need of something, and I came along out of charity, and I said, hey, here's $100, right? That person would get all $100, right? No inefficiency at all. I could give that person $100. They would receive $100. And here's the thing. I would feel good about the blessing, right? That I was able to take the resources that I have, right? Because it's my money and I can do with it what I want, right? So if I want to bless somebody, right, then it's like, hey, that warms my heart. It helps me feel good, right, to say, hey, there's a person in need and I've met that particular need. And then that person's able to receive that $100, all of it, no inefficiency. They're able to receive that $100. And here's the deal. They can say, you know what? Thank you. Thank you, Dan Panetti. Right. And there's a graciousness that they have in their heart because they know that that was a sacrifice that I made on their behalf. Well, what happens if government does that? What happens if government becomes the provider of that $100? Well, the first thing is that $100 becomes $60 real fast, right? Or less, because government's tremendously inefficient. And so if I am taxed $100, right, how much of that 100 actually gets into the hands of the person who government is actually helping? Well, far less than $100, okay? Because government is actually providing a system and a means to get it there, right? And so some of that $100 is taken away and not all of that $100 gets to the person. Now, here's the deal. How do I feel? Right? Do I feel good about being taxed $100, even if it's going to help somebody in need? Well, the answer is no, because I never see that person in need and I never know where it goes. And I know it's tremendously inefficient. And so I, as an individual, don't feel great about being taxed that $100. How does that person who received that money from the government feel? Well, here's the deal. Because it's so inefficient, and because it didn't come from a person where they feel gracious about it, right? They feel entitled to it. Right? They feel like, hey, I only got $60 or $50 or $40 to provide for my family, and I need more than that. Right? Dan Panetti was going to give me 100. The government gave me 40. Right? I can do far less with that money. And so they become entitled and they don't have a graciousness. And it becomes something where they're not receiving it well. And so they're always wanting more and more and more. And this government shutdown shows us what that looks like. Right? People are asking for government to provide for them, as opposed to looking around and saying, one, how can I go get those resources on my own? Or two, who are people, family, churches that can help, right? That want to help. Okay. And so just understand this is a lot of what's happening in our country today. When Mondami says, I'm a socialist, right? This is what he's bringing to the table, right? Is that particular concept. And so that's an important thing for us to wrestle with is, right? Should government be involved in these things? What should government be doing? And when you go vote, right, that's one of the things that you need to be asking, right? So Mike Johnson's, 7 core principles of conservatism, right? Individual liberty, right? Limited government, the rule of law, fiscal responsibility, that government should have a responsibility to look at where they put their money, right? Peace through strength, free markets, a way for everybody to benefit, is everybody to have an equal opportunity to go and make a living and then use those resources, right? Not only to take care of their family, but to bless others in need, not government doing it, but us doing it through a free market system. And then human dignity. That's his last one, his 7th one on here, right? Because all men are created in the image of God and they all deserve to have the protection to life and liberty in the pursuit of happiness. Going back to that, right? That Virginia governor, poll that they had, right? Babies born alive, should government protect them? We're not even talking about babies in the womb. We're talking about babies who are alive, babies who are born. Should government be protecting them? And there's a party that says no. There's a party that says no. It's amazing that we have gotten to this particular point, right? But here's the deal. In Texas, we had some things that we voted on as well, which were 17 constitutional amendments. And you may be thinking, well, that's far less interesting than the other elections, right? Where you're talking about people. Well, can I tell you? Here's what happens, right? Texas is an interesting state. Texas is a state that says we should have limited government. Our legislature, right, only meets for 140 days every other year. Okay, so that's government in Texas. We've got the ABCs, the agencies and the boards and the commissions that take our legislative rules that are passed in each legislative session and they put them into effect, right? And so we don't have a state legislature that's meeting every day, dealing with the affairs of people, right? They meet for 140 days every other year, and then they give that responsibility to those agencies, boards, and commissions. They say, listen, here's your resources, here's your money, here's your vision. Go put that, right? You're the people, you're the bureaucratic system, right? Go put these rules into effect. But one of the other things is, right, our Constitution is not something that gives a lot of direction. And so it needs to be constantly amended and updated. So it's very different. So I'm holding, here's a picture, right, of the U.S. Constitution, right? If you don't have a copy of one of these, by the way, you need to get one, right? What an incredible document. The U.S. Constitution, Declaration of Independence. Texas Constitution is very different than the U.S. Constitution. And so it is constantly up for amendment because when the legislature needs to do things, right, they have to constantly amend our Constitution, right? U.S. Constitution, very, very difficult to amend, isn't supposed to be amended unless it's super, 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 super important. The legislature, right, is the thing that's doing most of the rules that are affecting our lives. And so the Constitution is something that's over here being protected, right, from the U.S. standpoint. Texas is a little bit different, right? Texas, a lot of these things have to go through constitutional amendments. And so the legislature will meet, they'll come together and they'll find the areas, right, where they need to say, hey, our Texas Constitution needs to be amended. And this time we had an opportunity to vote on 17 of these things that they brought forward. I think the last check that I had was there have been 547 changes, okay, 547 changes to the Texas Constitution since it was adopted in 1876, right? So very, very different than the U.S. Constitution, which has 26 amendments. The Texas Constitution has 547. And so what were those amendments? What did each one of them do and look at? Well, kind of a fascinating thing, right? Some of them dealt with giving greater money back to people, right? So we talk about homestead exemptions and things like that. There's several different things in here that are looking at saying, we want Texans to have more of their money, less of it going to the school districts, less of it going to the government. And so our homestead exemptions have increased, and different people, right? So if you are a spouse of somebody who served in the military, right, you get those same particular benefits. So that's one of the things that Texas is looking at, right? How can we give more money back to people so that they're responsible for the money instead of giving it to the government, right? And that's, how in Texas, we don't have a state income tax. And so everything's done through property taxes and sales taxes, right? So those are very, very important, right? What value is your property at, and how much can the government tax you? Well, if you can get more of your property to be valued for your own and the government can't tax you on that, right? That's just more money back into the pockets of Texans to do with what they want, right? And that's one of the things that you saw in the constitutional amendments for Texas is, right, our legislature is saying, hey, give more money back to Texans, right? That's what they want. Water is a super important thing here, right? So we had one of those on there. Prohibiting a tax on capital gains, right? Again, Texas wants, if you make money, right, Texas wants you to keep more of your money, right? Less of it being taxed. Let's see, other things in here. The new stock exchange, right, that's looking at coming to Texas, right? They enacted, right, Proposition 6 dealt with enacting a law imposing an occupation tax on certain entities that enter into transactions conveying securities, right? So again, getting ready for Texas and those businesses coming from New York. And that stock exchange isn't only in New York, but there's going to be one here in Texas, right? Of more responsibility of Texas, because we give more of the freedoms to people and less to government. More businesses are moving here, more people are moving here. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about is the redistricting that's happening in Texas and how the rest of the country is dealing with that, right? Texas doesn't have an inheritance tax, more control of your money. I'm telling you, out of these 17, right, a majority of these deal with the idea that we want more people to have more control of their money. One of the things I thought was great, though, Proposition 12 dealt with judges, right? There's going to be individuals, a majority of citizens who are going to be on a committee that deals with judicial misconduct. Where before it was all judges looking at judicial misconduct. In Texas, we're saying, no, we don't want just judges watching other judges, right? It's kind of like, the fox watching the hen house, right? We want citizens, average people to be on there and provide accountability to our judges, which, by the way, in Texas, we get to elect our judges, right? So we get to, not our judges aren't appointed, right? We've got, the Court of Criminal Appeals, we've got the Texas Supreme Court, we've got all these different courts that we have in Texas, and we get to elect those particular positions. So important. But when there's a judge that is brought up on judicial misconduct, right, is it just other judges that are looking at that conduct? And the state of Texas said, no, we want citizens on that particular review committee as well. So important from that standpoint. But then the two that really people thought were the most important was Proposition 15 that said parents are the primary decision makers for their children. Literally, that's the language of the constitutional amendment, right? Parents are the primary decision makers for their children, right? And Texans went to the ballot box and said, yes, we affirm that, right? We're in other states, right, that is not being affirmed. And then a voter must be a U.S. citizen, right? And so Texas is cleaning up its voter rolls. I think the last thing that I saw was, some of our voter rolls had literally thousands of people who were not U.S. citizens, right? And those people are being cleared off the voter rolls. So they don't have a right and a responsibility to go and vote because they're not U.S. citizens, right? Why should they tell the rest of the citizens of Texas or the citizens of this particular country how to do business and what the law should be if they're not even citizens of this particular country? Right. And then the last one was dealing with border security. Right. And so just how does that work? So, again, let's go back to the redistricting concept. Texas is redistricting. We're in a lawsuit right now about a redistricting of 5 different districts. Now, we talked about redistricting, more and more people moving here to Texas, Texas getting more representation, right? Getting more congressmen and women. And here's the thing, why is that important? Well, it's important for a number of reasons, right? More of the ideas of Texas are going to the House, right? Of those 435 members of the House, more of them are going to be from Texas, right? 38 now, right? Every state only has two senators, okay? So it's kind of like we're going back to that, 11th grade class. Every state only has 2 senators, but The House is based on population. So as your population grows, you get more representation. As your population shrinks, you get less representation. And so the number of congressmen that you have from your particular state is based on your population. Okay, so if you only have one or two, right, you're a state that doesn't have a lot of population. If you have 30 or 40, right, you're a state that has a ton of population. Now, here's the thing. We always pay attention to this at one particular night. And that's when we have the president who's being elected, because the Electoral College, right, again, knowing your Constitution, the Electoral College is set up, right, so that each state has an opportunity to cast a ballot for the president of the United States, right? But when that state ballot is cast, so here in Texas, we cast a ballot, right? And whoever wins the state of Texas is going to get the Texas Electoral College votes. Right, and that night when we're voting for the president, you'll see, right, all the maps up there, and you'll see that what's happening. Well, what's happening is there's 538 electoral college votes. Okay, 538 electoral college votes. Where do those electoral college votes come from? Well, they're a representation of the 435 members of Congress, the 100 members of the Senate, and then the 3 electoral college votes, because that's 535. But there's 538. So where are those extra 3? Those extra 3 is the District of Columbia. Okay, the District of Columbia is not a state. Okay, it's a district. It's a District of Columbia. It's actually run by Congress. They do have a mayor, but the District of Columbia gets 3 electoral college votes based on the idea that if they were a state, they'd have 2 senators and they'd have 1 congressman. Okay, so there's 535. So how do you become president of the United States? Is you get a majority of the 535 electoral college votes, right? So basically you take 535, you divide it in half, you get 269, right? And if each person got 269, you'd have a tie. And so you need 270 electoral college votes to win. So whoever gets the first person to get to 270 electoral college votes is the president of the United States. Well, here's the deal, right? Those, right, electoral college votes, right, are coming from those congressional seats, right? And whether they're Republican or Democrat, right, is going to have an influence in the House, right, that whole time. And so just understand, right, super, super important. And so Texas right now is redistricting, and we're looking at 5 of those districts, redrawing some of the lines, right? And Republicans are in power. And so they're firming up that particular base to say, hey, we want more Republican representation because more and more Texans are voting in this particular way. And we want to reflect that when we send those 38 members to Congress. We want to reflect the views and the values of Texans. And here's what Texans are voting on. Here's what Texans are saying is important. Those now go right to Congress and they represent those, right? And it's going to have an impact not only every day that Congress is in session, but it's going to have an impact right on that electoral college and when we vote for president. Well, here's the thing. California looked at this and they said, hey, we don't like that. And so they redistrict every 10 years based on their census, right? It's actually a state law that they have based on their census. Every 10 years they redistrict. Well, this is 2025, right? Obviously not a census year. And so what does California decide to do? Well, they decide to offer a proposition called Prop 50. You can see it on the screen if you're looking at it, right? Where they're going to redistrict 5 of their stronger Republican districts and make them more Democratic. So trying to counterbalance exactly what Texas is doing, right, by doing just the opposite in California. So again, right, think about this concept. Here's people in Texas voting a particular way, saying, these are the views and the values that we want here in Texas. And we want these particular people to represent us. And we want these particular people to go to Washington, D.C. and represent these particular views and values. And what do people in California say? They say, we don't like those views and values that you have in Texas. We don't care what you vote about in Texas. We want our views and values to be the dominant, not just here in California, but across the country. And so we're going to counter what you're doing in Texas, right, by taking those particular principles, right? We're going to counter, and we're going to have 5 congressional seats over here, right? And we're going to counter this move to the right by a move to the left. Now, here's the thing. That's an amazing concept, right? Because we talked about how California is trying to change Texas, and it's literally happening, right? So what we're doing here in Texas, and the people who have moved here, and the businesses that have come here, and the views and the values that are dominating, right, the landscape here in Texas, California, where people and businesses are moving away from, is saying, hey, how can we have influence? Well, we can have influence by countering what's happening in Texas. So the voters in California literally, this is what Prop 50 is, literally said, hey, Texas, think about it. Voters in California said, hey, Texas, we don't like your views and values in Texas, right? We don't want your families to have more of an influence, right? Have more money to control, right? We don't want you to build a wall, right? Making sure that only legal immigrants get in. We don't want you to protect human life, right? Because I'm telling you, right, abortion is illegal in the state of Texas, right? And the California voters are like, no, Texas, you don't have a right to decide those things on your own, right? We don't want your views and values to dominate the day for Texas and our country, and so we're going to counter it, right? And that proposition actually passed in California to try to California our Texas. So it's an amazing concept. That's the thing that we need to pay attention to, right? Is why are people voting the way that they are? Where are they getting their information? And what's their impetus? What's their motivation, right? Is it to create, think about this, is Prop 50 to create a stronger California? Did the voters of California go and say, how can we make California better? Or how can we counter what's successful and working in Texas with our views and values that isn't working here in California? That's what's happening, that you're seeing this, right? So that's what we're seeing across the country, right? As people are going to the ballot box. And it's an amazing thing, right? Is California going to do this if North Carolina, right? Or if Georgia redistricts, is California going to have to redistrict again and again and again to try to counter every move where people are beginning to move towards views and values that represent and protect their family and their views and their values? But people in other states are saying, no, you can't do that, right? We're going to counter that in our state, right? Even though these views and values are not making our state successful, we don't want your state to be successful either. Well, what does that mean for us? Right? We're sitting here after the election day, okay, looking back on these things and saying, what have we learned? What do we pay attention to? And I'm just going to tell you, here's the thing, right? One, I voted, so I express my views and values, and I hope you voted as well. But there's another election day coming up. And here's the thing, when people get tired, right? People get tired of politics all the time. It's not politics all the time. But there's another election that's coming up. And between now and then, there are some things that you need to do, right? There's things that you need to do to get yourself ready and prepared for that next election cycle, okay? Now, here's the deal. Election cycles, right? Before we get to a November election, right, which is usually a general election, you're going to have a primary election. Again, in Texas, this is a huge thing that's happening, right? Because you're going to have Republicans, Democrats both hold their own primaries in March. And in that primary, you get to go express your views and values to your particular party so that you've got the best Republican or the best Democrat running for those particular offices. And then the best Republican or the best Democrat get to run against each other in November. So it's important for you to be registered and vote in the primary so you can put your best person forward, right? So here's the deal. One, you need to know what the different parties stand for and what they're about. So you need to look at the party platforms and you need to say, what do Republicans stand for and what's important to them? What do Democrats stand for and what's important to them? Again, go back to that Virginia governor's, right, description. Here's the different things, and you see where the parties, right, agreed or disagreed, right? They split on these particular issues, okay? You need to pick a party and look at it and say, hey, I want to be involved in that party and I want to vote for these particular individuals within that particular party because I want the best person running for state representative, running for governor, running for president from this particular party. So here's the deal. You need to get registered to vote, okay? And it's free and it's easy to register to vote. Okay. A lot of churches have voter registration. You can do it online, right? Your county is responsible for your voter registration. So if you live in whatever county, right, 354 of them in Texas, find your county, voter registration, right, and register to vote. You need to be registered 30 days before an election, right? So if we're looking at the screen here, it says that Texas is going to have primary elections on March 3rd, which means that by February 3rd, you need to be registered to vote. Okay, super important responsibility, right? If you're not registered, you can't vote. Now, just understand that it really is kind of an interesting thing, right? But just over half the people who are eligible to vote are actually registered to vote. Okay, and so that's really important. When you go to an election day and you look at how many registered voters went and voted, you still have to understand that there's still a bunch of people who could have voted, but they haven't even registered. So they're not even registered voters. Okay, so I'm just going to tell you responsibilities. Where do we go from here? One, register to vote. Okay, say I want to be a part of this great experiment in self-government in this country, right? And I want my views and my voice to be heard. And so I'm going to go register to vote. And then start looking for, right, individuals and organizations that you can listen to and that you can evaluate and that you can trust that provide information for you so that you can begin to learn and discern the issues of the day. Can I just say, okay, here's the deal. The number one most important thing you can pay attention to is the Word of God. Because the Word of God will inform you how to understand. A biblical worldview is the most important thing that you can have when it comes to understanding politics. It is absolutely true. A biblical worldview, the most important thing. You need to know more about the Bible than you do about the cultural issues, because the Bible will inform you about the cultural issues. So as those cultural issues move and something becomes more important or less important, as the issues of the day change, your understanding of those issues doesn't change, because you've got the Bible as your guide. And so it doesn't matter what everybody else is doing or what everybody else thinks is popular or where everybody else is going, right? You stay firm to the Word of God and the principles that God's Word has given you, right? And I tell you, the issues that are so important that we're looking at today, marriage, right? Gender and sexuality, the family, right? Those things are tremendously important. God's Word is very, very clear on those particular issues, and government now is coming in. Some people get very frustrated, right? That these are political issues. And can I tell you, I get that. I get that frustration, but here's the deal. They are, okay? And back to that George Washington quote, because they're political issues, the government can force you to do something, right? Government's not just reason. It's not just eloquence. It's a force. So you need to understand, right, that we go back to, I mean, there's a case, right? I can't remember his name, Jack something, Colorado. He's a baker, right? So he's just trying to bake cakes and make a living, right? And two individuals come in and say, we want you to bake a cake for our same-sex wedding, right? And he said, no, I don't want to do that, right? That should be his right, right? Why should I have to bake a cake for something that not only do I not believe in, but I don't support and I don't think is valuable, right? Find another bakery to make your cake. Well, here's the deal. They sued him, right? So now he's in court trying to protect his right to have a living according to his particular views and principles. That's what we're talking about. Does it make sense? That's what we're talking about. Is, do you have a right to guide your family according to these particular principles and guidelines, to put your children in whatever school that you want to put them in, to raise them with an understanding, right, that men and women are created in the image of God, right, to protect your girls from boys competing against them, and to value gender, sexuality, marriage as God has designed? Do we have a right to do those things? Do we have a right to worship as we please, right? Can I just tell you, there are other countries that, if you want to pay attention to what's going on, pay attention to some other countries that don't have our Constitution, right? Can I just tell you, one of the things that happened in England, there was a man who was praying silently across the street from an abortion clinic. Okay, praying silently across the street from an abortion clinic, who gets arrested for a silent prayer. Now, here's the thing. You may think about that and you may say, okay, that's absurd. That would never happen. Okay, one, hopefully it would never happen here in the United States, but it is happening in other places because they don't have this particular document, the U.S. Constitution. And that's why, that's why we need to go to the ballot box to protect those rights that we have and not take them for granted, because there's other people that don't have those rights and they're fighting for their right to be able to pray silently across the street from an abortion clinic. Yes, that's what we're talking about. It's an amazing concept, right? But here's the deal. We're here in America. We've got these rights. We've got these privileges, and we need to defend them and we need to protect them. So where do we go from here? We go register to vote. We find out organizations that can help us know and understand these. We spend time, can I tell you, spend time in the Word of God. Get involved in a good Bible church, right? A church that opens up the Word of God and teaches you how the Word of God applies to your life. And yes, talks about politics. Now, can I tell you something that just happened? Supreme Court just said churches for the last 60 years have not been able to endorse candidates, right? It was a violation of their IRS, right, tax exempt status. Supreme Court just said, no, not a violation. They can endorse candidates. Now, will churches endorse candidates or will they not? Can I say, if I'm teaching you the Word of God and you know the Word of God and you look at these particular principles as they apply to different candidates, I don't really need to endorse a particular candidate. You should be able to read through a list of where that candidate stands on these particular issues and say, those issues line up with the Word of God, those issues do not. But it is kind of interesting, right, that from this moment forward, you may have churches that can actually endorse from the pulpit a particular candidate. They may say, you can vote for so-and-so because that lines up with our views and values. So that's kind of an interesting thing that you're going to have. And coming up to, can I just tell you, we're also coming up to, I mentioned the Constitution, right? We're coming up to the 250th birthday of the United States, young country, right? Young country. And we need to understand how important it is to keep this country governed by you and I, the citizens of the United States. What's coming up? Primary and then election day coming up in November. You see it on the screen, right? All of Congress, all 435 members of Congress are always up every 2 years, okay? So Congress can change dramatically, right? Every 2 years that there's an election because all 435 members are up for election. So you need to look at it and say, and here's the deal. Incumbents are very, very difficult to beat, because people get comfortable with the person who's representing them. You need to look at and say, does my person represent the views and values that I have, right? Who is your congressman? Who is your congressperson? You need to know that, right? You need to know who your senators are. Here in Texas, we have a huge election coming up for a U.S. senator, and there's 35 senators, right? So a third of the Senate every 2 years, because they have 6-year terms. So a third of the Senate is always up every 2 years for election. So we have 35 senators coming up. And then we have 39 governors. We just talked about 2 very important governors races, right? We talked about Virginia. We talked about New Jersey. Well, there's 39 governors who are going to be up for election, who are leading their particular state. And then, can I just tell you, there are state houses, right? There are local elections, right? So important for you to know about the election process, for you to be participating in the election process, and voting your views and your values. And I'll say this, right? Don't just vote your views and values, vote biblical views and values, right? Because honestly, at the end of the day, Dan Panetti's views and values, right? If they don't line up with scripture, they are not going to be beneficial for our country anyway. So what I want to do is I want to know, what does the Bible tell me about the best way for humanity to flourish, right? And the Bible will tell you the best way for humanity to flourish. And then look for those particular policies and principles being played out in the political arena and vote for the people who are going to advance the best way of human flourishing. Mike Johnson, I just got to give credit to Mike, right? Mike Johnson's 7 principles of conservatism, right? Super, super important guideline for you. Look for people who stand for individual liberty and freedom, who stand for limited government, who understand the rule of law, right, who get fiscal responsibility, who get peace through strength, who understand free markets, not socialism. Okay, socialism is not going to help you. You know, people of New York City, right? I'm sorry for you, right? But Mondami told you what he was going to do, right? And just understand it's going to come at a tremendous cost for you and the rest of our country. So understand, right? You want people who want to give people back their money and tell them to be responsible for their money. And that's the best way we can help people in need, are individuals with charity and churches who can reach out to them. And then human dignity, right? We want people who protect human life, right, and value a human life. And I'm just going to tell you, when you lay those 7 principles that Mike Johnson has given us, and you look at those things from a biblical perspective, and you look at the issues that are being talked about in the day, you will understand how to vote. So make sure you're registered to vote, make sure you get out and vote, and make sure you share this with somebody else who needs to vote as well, right? You're not the only person, right? Like this, share this, subscribe, right? Because I'm telling you, we are going to help you as parents, as individuals who want to make a difference in our country. We're going to help you understand how to do that. And then can I tell you, leave some comments, ask some questions. Let us understand how we can better serve you and get you information and resources so that you can make a difference and protect the views and the values, right, that the Bible has given us, right? This is the best way for humanity to flourish. Let's go out there and protect those as we make a difference as Texans and U.S. citizens for our great country. Say that. God bless America. Love you guys.